this is a very important topic. I mean, that's very close to any parent's heart. I mean, because they want to see their child growing and developing normally. And so the question of what is normal comes up. And when you know what is normal and there is a lot of variation in normal, so that's one of the common reasons for anxiety in the parents. So one of the roles of the pediatricians is to follow a regular system when they assess the growth and development of their child at their regular visits. So we do see the children in the first year of life quite frequently because it's linked with the vaccination. So when we see them at the reviews, we call it holistic care. You're not just treating what the child is there for, just not just giving the vaccines, but you want to look at the wholesome development of the child. You want to assess the growth. You want to look into factors which can be improved in the nutrition, for example, which may improve the growth if there is a concern. You have to assess the development of the child as well. So we do have a set pattern, and with experience, you don't need to really think about what you're doing because it's a reflex pattern. For example, in terms of growth, I mean, we have the weight, height, and head circumference that we review at each visit. And as you might be familiar, the vaccination visits are timed, like we give vaccines at birth. And then we have the 2-month, 4-month, 6-month stage and a possible review at 9 months for optional vaccines or the influenza vaccine if it is a season. And then we see them at 1 year, 15 months and 18 months. So this is quite regular visits, and it's usually adequate to combine these visits with the assessment of the growth and development. So in terms of the growth, we follow growth charts. And for a breastfeeding baby, for example, we prefer the World Health Organization growth chart, which is designed with breastfeeding babies. So the studies were carried out on cohorts of breastfeeding babies in different countries around the world. So the formula-fed babies may grow a bit faster than the breastfeeding babies because we may tend to feed them a little more. The breastfeeding has advantage that they regulate better, so we expect them to grow slower. Again, if the baby is born small for any reason, if they are growth restricted within the womb, or if they have some other condition which makes them to be small, for example, genetic pattern, their growth profile is going to be different from that of a baby who is born with a normal weight or a larger weight. And there's another factor that goes on with time, that the genetic potential catches the baby's growth. So even if they are born like 4 kilos at birth, which is on the larger side, if the family tends to be small, after 4 to 6 months, the baby's own growth will start sloping down in majority of the situations. So this is called sloping down or catching up with the genetic potential. So we have to be aware of many of these factors when we assess growth. Don't jump to a conclusion that just because the baby is on the lower centile or the higher centile, they are abnormal. So the advice we give should be titrated to the needs of the child. Same applies to development as well. So in terms of development, we have structured assessment according to the category or the group of milestones that we are looking at. So we have fields of development, so to speak. So we have the motor field, we have the fine motor field, which is to do with the fine tasks that the child is refining to do with the eye and hand coordination. And we have the social field, we have the language field. So we have different aspects of development of the child, and each field has a certain pattern according to the age of the child. So we have screening tools. I mean, the beginners may prefer to use a screening tool like the Denver Development Screening Tool in your clinic. So you tick the boxes. Some of them are based on the questions that the mothers answer, and some of them are based on what you examine and assess. So, for example, a child is supposed to smile socially at 2 months of age, but it is a range of 4 weeks to 3 months or 3.5 months. Babbling and vocalizing, achievement of head control, rolling over, reaching. So these are all motor milestones apart from babbling, which I mentioned is a language-related milestone. So even if you look at language, for example, we have expressive language where the child is speaking out, and receptive language where the child receives the words and understands. These two are separated because sometimes the kids are slow in speaking, but if they're understanding well, then it's a different field. In terms of importance of developmental assessment, I mean, many parents are concerned these days about autism and the pervasive developmental disorders. So any child with a delayed language, for example, they would be quite worried about it. And it's a major worry because it's so much in the press and everyone knows the severity. So we need to recognize such conditions. We need to give them advice like avoiding screen time at the appropriate time. So significant motor developmental delay is not that common. I mean, cerebral palsy is one of the reasons. If a child is developing normally and then they suddenly start losing their milestones, we call it regression of milestones. That can happen with the autistic spectrum, but it can also happen with certain neurodevelopmental problems which are more serious. Occurrence of seizures in a child may also affect this, and it may reflect something more serious inside. So these are an outline of factors we consider when we look at the growth and development. I mean, development is basically a manifestation of how your brain is maturing. So with each sequential maturation, the child starts doing more tasks. And to some extent, it's a nature and nurture combination. So we have what you have inherited from your parents, genetically, how mature your brain is, how the intelligence potential is, and also the nurture part where how much stimulation the child is getting in the right directions. So these will matter as well. So an appropriate environment will help even a high-risk child to develop better, as many studies have shown. And hampering of development may affect even if the genetic potential is similar. I mean, many twin studies have been shown where twins were separated for adoption reasons, and then according to the parents' interest, the socioeconomic status, and so on, the child's potential later on is affected. Of course, we have many movies made on these principles as well. So in terms of causes of problems, I'll approach your second question first. In terms of causes of developmental delay, so we have, for example, prematurity, which is a big cause of developmental delay. When we come to prematurity, we see we can save even 22, 23 weeks in rare situations, and some hospitals around the world are actually specializing in managing these babies. Most of the centers in UAE and other countries are managing 24 weeks and beyond quite regularly. And when the baby comes out premature, the development is going to be happening outside the womb, which is not the natural environment for the baby's development. So they have a high risk of developing problems. So they may have a bleed in the brain. The excessive stimulation that happens inside the womb, it's a compact, closed environment, dampening of sounds, the baby is in a fluid environment, no touch, and so on. But unfortunately, when the baby is born, we need to do many procedures in the intensive care to stimulate them. And the brain growth actually is happening in a very rapid phase at this time. So brain cells mature, and then they start migrating to the peripheral parts, they proliferate. These are the stages of brain development. And then the differentiation happens when the synapse formation happens. So this happens from 24 to 36 weeks. The migration is most active, and the organization is starting to happen by 34, 35 weeks. So when the stimulus is happening at the wrong time, the synapse formation gets disorganized. So when the synapses are formed, some of the synapses are removed. That is called apoptosis process. So we have the pruning of the development. So that's why screen time also impacts the development, because these impacts, the prematurity is happening at a very critical stage when the brain is still developing. Then we have at the later stage when these pruning and things are happening, if your stimulus is not in the right way, baby develops abnormally. So prematurity, then you have inherited conditions which can cause developmental delay. You may have genetic conditions which may cause developmental delay. Malnutrition itself may cause developmental problems. So it's not considered that important to course. I mean, iron, for example, the nutritional iron intake is very important. Iron deficiency in the first 6 months to 12 months may affect your intelligence. We have conditions like hypoglycemia in the newborn period. If your blood sugar drops, you may have a developmental problem in the brain. So any injury to the brain, it can be infection, it can be birth asphyxia, what we call when the baby doesn't get enough oxygen around the time of delivery. We may have jaundice, which goes to very high level. So these are all factored in. I mean, the obstetricians are working very hard to avoid asphyxia. The neonatologists are working hard to avoid hypoglycemia. We do risk factor-based screening. We look for infections and treat them at the earliest. Jaundice is screened and monitored, so we don't reach a high level of jaundice, which can affect the brain. So all these are factored in. Sometimes you have unfortunate things. I mentioned genetic factors like Down syndrome, you might have seen, which we cannot avoid because it happens in nature. And sometimes the mothers are offered tests during the pregnancy to pick up such chromosomal defects if the risk is there. depending on the scan, and they get a triple test around 12 to 15 weeks of gestation, and then they take it from there. We do the newborn screening to pick up conditions like inherited conditions, genetic conditions, hypothyroidism. So any of these could affect the brain development, and you're trying to pick up early so you can treat them. Like if the thyroid level is low, for example, we do a test called TSH in the newborn screening, which tends to be high. And based on this, we can pick up these babies early and treat before there is a risk of brain injury. So when we were training like 25, 30 years ago, we used to see children coming with mental retardation because of hypothyroidism. But thankfully, with the newborn screening being generally applied, we don't see that anymore. You have other issues like blindness, for example, or hearing losses, which can also affect your child's development. If the hearing is not there, the language development is going to be affected. If the vision is not there, your fine motor development is going to be affected. Even your movement and your understanding and perception of the world is going to be different. Coming to your second part of the question about management of developmental delay, obviously, you have to look into what is producing the developmental delay, how severe is it, and then you look into nurturing that part which is defective in the child. So it may involve physiotherapy, it may involve a referral to a neurologist to look further. You may need imaging like MRI scan of the brain. When it comes to therapy, we have a combination multidisciplinary approach, we call it. So it's not one colleague who will alone help. I mean, we have different fields that are affected. So we may involve the audiologist, for example, if there is a hearing problem. We may involve the physiotherapist who deals with the muscle tone and the posture and so on. We may involve the occupational therapist who has things to improve the functioning and so on. So it's a multidisciplinary approach. These are unfortunately expensive when it comes to a setup like UAE, because each session every hour may cost you 400 to 500 dirhams. So they need to keep going for it on a regular basis. I mean, I explained to you why prematurity itself is a risk. So in the NICU, we have something called a development-friendly approach. So the nurses who are looking after the baby, or the doctors, we try to cluster the care of the babies. We try to minimize the number of times we handle the baby. We have adaptations to have day-night changes, like darkening of the room at times, quiet times in the unit. We have noise monitors. Even when we speak, sometimes the decibel level goes high. The baby is inside the incubator with the fan running inside, and that creates a regular noise. We try to keep the noise level. So this is development-friendly practice. And we have something called kangaroo mother care, where the mother holds a baby on her chest, or the dad may hold as well within the clothes. And this helps the baby perceive what is more natural. So the bonding happens. The baby is feeling the mother's heartbeat, which was obviously the main sound the baby used to hear within the womb. The comforting touch of the mother is felt by the baby rather than the painful stimulus when we do a procedure or anything like that. So we encourage kangaroo mother care at the earliest possible as well to help this progress. In terms of obviously preventing the causes, like handling gently from the beginning, avoid intraventricular hemorrhage and things like that. But these are not that easily avoided, because it's partly due to the immaturity of the brain. The reason the baby is coming out early may be due to infection, and that may be creating a risk for the baby's development. So we look at nutrition of the baby to be optimized. We look at these factors and so on. So this is one way to reduce the impact happening. What problems we expect in a premature baby depends on whether it is just the prematurity or there was a bleed in the brain. Sometimes we get a more severe problem called cystic periventricular leukomalacia, where the brain white matter gets broken down. And if that happens, you have a higher chance of cerebral palsy. When there is a bleed in the space within the brain called ventricles, it may enlarge with time, and that may be a post-hemorrhagic hydrocephalus, we call it, and that may need treatment with shunt. So the babies may have language delay, they may have movement delay, they may have tone abnormalities in the limbs, which means they are stiff to handle, or they may be floppy. And we call this physical developmental problems as cerebral palsy. So the different grades of it, not every baby is going to be very severely affected. But when you have cerebral palsy, you need regular input, you need the support. Physiotherapy becomes more important, and neurologists follow up. Some of these babies may develop fits with time. They may have visual or language delay. Prematurity also has another visual problem called retinopathy of prematurity, which is again due to the prematurity. The blood vessels proliferate in the eye, and they may cause retinal detachment if you don't pick it up and treat. So all units have a screening protocol with the eye doctor after 4 weeks or so for the premature babies who fit that criteria. So we'll be monitoring them closely and treat it to avoid this severe visual loss happening. Some of the medicines we use to treat the premature babies, like antibiotics, may have side effects on their hearing, for example. So we need to monitor their hearing as well. We have infections which can affect the hearing, vision, and the brain development. So this is the factor behind prematurity, and we have more stringent follow-up for the premature babies who are at risk of neurodevelopmental delay. And we have something called early developmental care even after they discharge home. We involve the physiotherapist, the occupational therapist early to try and stimulate them. So the brain is plastic. So when we say plastic, it can be molded. An area of the brain which is affected may not function, but another area of the brain may take over that function, and that's called plasticity of the developing brain. So we make use of this principle. So you start stimulating them the right way. Stimulation doesn't mean overstimulation. You stimulate them in the right way, in the appropriate way, in a designed format, and that's why you need the experienced colleagues to guide that process. So I had mentioned to you that I have a YouTube channel, and one of the main stress there is preventive care. So what a parent should do and what they shouldn't do. So one of the things is looking at the milestones, discussing with the pediatrician any concerns they have about the growth and development. Most pediatricians do holistic care, but in case you happen to meet someone who doesn't ask these questions, you have to ask those questions and direct it. Do the appropriate stimulus for the baby. Do not use a baby walker, for example. Start doing tummy time to position the baby appropriately. When the baby reaches 5 to 6 months, you can make them sit on a feeding chair, and they can look around the world. They can start finger feeding and so on. Walker is not good because they tend to toe walk sometimes, and there is a higher risk of accident. So something which doesn't benefit but might harm, you want to avoid. Screen time is absolute no-no in the first 18 months. I told you about this, and I have a detailed video on why screen time affects the brain development. So I would recommend you to go to the channel to look at it. So you want to avoid screen time because I told you about the pruning of the synapses in the brain, and that is hampered when communication is a two-way process, while watching a screen is a one-way process. The child is glued to the screen. It's an edited video, so they are not looking at it in the real way things happen in life. So they start developing a picture of the world that is different from the real picture. They start getting impatient. They don't feel that interaction is necessary, so they don't respond to the parents. And we see a number of children where they come for an assessment for autism, and when they stop the screen time for a period of time, they start interacting normally. So tantrums, the discipline, and so on is another aspect that the parent should be aware of, because discipline starts right from this time the child starts learning. So for 5 to 6 months onwards, you need to have an approach in your mind as to how you look at disciplining the child. It doesn't mean having a stick and beating up the child. It just means that you look at the response of the child in each aspect. Don't give in to their mild tantrums. The tantrums are mild to start with, and they become stronger as they see the reaction of the parent. So you respond appropriately and they manage it. So parenting comes from appropriate channeling of what is available in appropriate ways. So you can start reading to the child at 6 to 9 months, and then you start encouraging their language development. So not having screen time, reading early, making them sit and do tasks rather than just allow the motor development to progress. So these are things which will channelize the development. Of course, I told you about the early developmental care, and if the child is not that premature, we don't need that preventively. But if the child is like less than 28 weeks, where the risk of developmental problems is very high, or you have scan findings on the brain ultrasound or the MRI scan, if they happen to do it, that shows that the child is a definite risk, then even if the child is showing features that they're doing okay at that time, as you grow, your tasks become complex and you have a higher chance of manifesting problems. So if the child is relatively normal by 6 months to 1 year, you can say for sure that it's not a major problem, but you cannot rule out learning difficulties in certain aspects of your learning. For example, how well you perform complex tasks, how well you communicate, and these things come with time. So you start doing early intervention therapy for those high-risk groups, so you optimize their development. If you do identify problems, you manage it appropriately. It's a good question. I mean, it comes back to the question of what I mentioned, and there is a video on discipline as well where I discuss detailed about how to approach discipline in children. So resilience happens from taking no for an answer at times. So nowadays parents get so worried about refusing anything to the child, and they get used to getting everything, and that's why the tantrums increase as well, because they can't take no. They are becoming overly sensitive as well. So tolerance, resilience, these things happen from how the parents react to situations, and that's why what we do, how we react from the early stages. I know that young child is a lot of fun to play with, and we hardly feel like saying no to them, but you have to say no and sensitize them to that as well. I mean, that they can't get what they want all the time. And resilience also prepares them for the outside world, because when they go to the nursery, for example, there may be a child who is different, they behave differently, and they may see an adult who is behaving, the teacher may be strict, so they become sensitive and they start reacting to that as well. So you start early and inculcate that. Of course, your personality plays a role. I mean, if you are very timid, then you may be less resilient. And if the parents give up early, resilience is just persistence. I mean, how you're, you're kind of protecting yourself from the harsh circumstances that the outside world might provide. So you have to prepare the child, and according to their personality, you have to mold the experience as well. Overprotection is not good. So you have to start that from the family itself. And especially if you are from an affluent family, if you have nannies who are told off if they say anything no to the child, then you're facing a conflict. The child doesn't understand that different adults behave differently, and they take one response as right, which they want. So that's why we say consistency in approach is very important in discipline as well. So all these aspects should be looked at. How many members in the family are there who work with the child? Even if it's a nanny, you have to give them the limitations of what the child should and shouldn't do. And when tantrums happen, you have to have a situation management like timeout and so on. So you have to introduce those. If you have a older sibling, you can use them as a role model. Positive reinforcement always works, and negative reinforcement causes more trouble. So if a child is doing something you don't like, don't react too much to it, or avoid the stimulus. Take the child away if possible, but don't tell them off for it immediately. When they are doing a better thing, when they are behaving better, praise them. So positive reinforcement works, but negative reinforcement doesn't work. So the same applies to many habits that the children have that you don't want them to do as well, like throwing things or breaking things. So distract them and move them away from the situation that they do it, but when they don't do it, praise them. So that's called positive reinforcement. I mean, in the very beginning, I mentioned to you how we discuss the growth and development during the vaccine visits, and parents are welcome to look at the options available online in terms of what is a normal development. There are many charts that are available that the parents can look at. Their family members usually start picking up if a child is not doing a particular thing. So any concern, they bring it to the attention of their pediatrician, even if they think it's silly. I mean, no one is going to mind they're asking questions. And obviously, this discussion will come up when they visit. And even if it's a visit for some other reason, bring up the topic of concern and clarify it. So early identification is very important. Maybe it's not a significant problem. There is a normal range, as I told, for any aspect. A child may walk from 9 to 10 months of age up to 15 to 18 months of age. But if a boy doesn't walk by 18 months, it's significant. But at the same time, if it's a very premature baby, you give allowance for that. This is called correction for prematurity. So if the parent brings a concern, then the physician can look into the factors which might explain the delay, or they may consider doing a test or anything else, further assessment to know whether anything is wrong. So highlighting the normal pattern of development, being aware of that, and then if any deviation happens which is significant, then raising it. I mean, a simple email to your pediatrician may be enough to know my child isn't doing this. Till when can I wait to see if he will do it? I mean, this will clarify it as well. I mean, obviously, during the lockdown, people were told to stay in, and even the vaccines were delayed. There was a lot of public messages going out there not to delay vaccines because they're very important. Thankfully, because of the preventive measures that everyone is taking, I mean, the hand hygiene, wearing masks, social distancing, reducing going out, The school closures, of course, add to it. All these have resulted in very few acute problems in children, like infections needing hospitalization or something. And most of the infections are mild, and they're able to manage it at home. So we have seen a significant drop in the outpatient visits of children, and now the vaccine visits are not being delayed. Parents are more aware that they can come and seek help with the appropriate precautions in the hospitals. But at the same time, because the overall rate of illness has dropped, which is a very good thing for parents, it's something that we need to work on. I mean, if there is a concern, don't hesitate to bring. But if you're able to manage at home, that's fine, and don't delay the vaccines.